Hello. We've 5 similar videos ready to start this channel, and they're all aimed at starting an AI career. We want to keep it nice and simple, nice and concise. Each one uses Vagrant as an infrastructure as code tool to make easy stepping stones. It's important to understand the expression pets v cattle. So some people like to look after the PC and add this program and know exactly how it comes. And cattle, if you describe your PC as cattle, is you just automate it, build it. And that means it's easy to have hundreds of thousands of servers or computers doing the same thing. So for the whole of this, we're treating things as cattle. So we'll build them up, we'll run them, and then we'll wipe them at the end, rather than patching, whatever. And we also want you to have no outlay. I realise a lot of you might be youngsters and not be able to spend lots of money. So if you've got spare capacity in your laptop or desktop, we'll run it in a virtual machine. So that's maybe a little bit of memory, a little bit of disk space temporarily, and then wipe it. And if you don't have capacity in your laptop, we'll use Ubuntu in a Raspberry Pi, or we'll install Ubuntu in an old PC. So it's nice and simple. So please let us know if you get any comments, or if you like this format, or you've got other ideas. So the 5 initial videos are: one, we're going to install Peppermint, which is a call login system. So anyone who wants to start a company on that probably needs a call login system for the customers. We're going to show you how easy WordPress is. That's our blogging system. We're going to use a shop which is based on Google's fantastic Kubernetes demo. But to start with, we're going to use Docker Compose, or Podman and Podman Compose. There's no need to get to the complexity of Kubernetes yet. Just bear in mind, everything we learn in Docker, we can use in Kubernetes. Kubernetes just makes it high availability, or you can scale much bigger, but we don't need that for the simple things. Then we'll install DeepSeek, which is an LLM, and then some people might want to get a career in the automation of the different models, so we'll install NA10. And there are other similar tools, but it's a good way for AI orchestration of getting learned stuff. And if everyone likes this, we'll tie the videos together with a blog or a book if there's interest. So we're going to install WordPress on Docker. On the left is what I'm going to install it just now. I'm using an Apple Silicon M1 MacBook Air. And if you don't have capacity on your PC or laptop, we'll use the right hand side, which you can use an old PC or a Raspberry Pi. Yeah, as you can see, they're very similar. On the Mac, we put on the tools to make a VM, and then within the VM, it's exactly the same components that go in the Raspberry Pi. So we're going to put on Docker and Docker Compose, and then we're going to use WordPress and a database. So all good. The software you'll need, if you're on a Mac, you'll use iTerm 2 as your SSH client, and if you're on a PC, you'll use PuTTY. So if you're using a Raspberry Pi, just go to Raspberry Pi's website, download the imager, and then we'll install an Ubuntu server image. Raspberry Pi OS is obviously better for the Raspberry Pi, but because this is focused on being in a career, we'll just use mainstream Unix. If you're Raspberry Pi, it's only $5 extra for a dedicated SD card for this stuff. And you can use your own projects that actually are fun and on an existing card. So if you're an Apple Silicon, you want the VMware desktop hypervisor. It's free. You have to sign up and get a license for one machine. And if you've got an Intel chipset, you need to use VirtualBox. I think VirtualBox shortly will be supporting ARM, so we'll be able to switch and just use VirtualBox soon enough. But for just now, I'm using the VMware hypervisor on my MacBook Air. And the infrastructure as code tooling we need is something called Vagrant. It was by HashiCorp, which is now being bought over by IBM. But we install Vagrant, and we install the Vagrant VMware utility. I'll do some slower paced videos on how to do this in the future, but I assume the majority of people can install this without following the example. So on Vagrant, we're going very much in the cats v petal, pets v cattle, sorry. Vagrant up, it's going to bring up the environment from the one file. Vagrant destroy -F is a forced destroy of the environment, which means we can play with it and then wipe it, and it's gone completely. The Vagrant SSH command, that lets you get into the environment while it's running. We don't need it this time, but it's a handy command. There are other options for the future for like the secure copy command and stuff like that, but just now we're just going to use the 3 commands. Or you can manually set up a VM, which I'll do a video on, or install Ubuntu on a Raspberry Pi or an old PC. Whichever way we go, it's all good. So this is the Vagrant configuration file. In fact, this is the whole file. This is the only file we're going to use to build WordPress. So the first few lines, so the config VM box, we're fetching one of the default Ubuntu boxes. So this just says the operating system we're going to put on is Ubuntu. The provider we're going to use is VMware Fusion, because I'm on a Mac. Oh, sorry, I'm on an Apple Silicon Mac. And we're going to set the memory to 4 gig, and we're going to use 2 virtual CPUs. So this is actually a 16 gig MacBook Air, so we're only going to use a quarter of the memory for this experiment. I can't remember how many cores we've got, but we've got about 7 or 8, so we're only going to use 2. So basically a quarter of the capacity of a MacBook Air is what we're going to use for this demo. The sync folder command, that just means we don't want the Mac and the virtual machine being able to share files and stuff like that. We just want nice wee environment that we can build, play with, wipe. The next line is the networking. So my network at home is 192.168.1. Chances are you're either going to be 192.168.1 or 192.168.0. So if your network's a 0, you need a 0 in there. And I've just picked a high number so we don't get it allocated by DCP. So that's worth it, right? Now we've got shell commands, and now we've got about 15 lines. Should you be building, if you've built a Raspberry Pi or an old PC, these are the commands you need. This is what we install in the operating system. So the rest of the commands are around building the virtual machine, and what we do within the virtual machine or on your old PC are these kinds of commands. So we do an apt update, which just tells that where the new versions of the packages are, because we're going to be installing Docker in a second, so it needs to know where they are. And that hash sign in the next line comments that out. So that means patch the system, the apt upgrade. There is very little point patching a system that's going to last half an hour. There's no point spending 10-15 minutes doing that. So the next line is UFW is actually the firewall in Ubuntu. So we're disabling the firewall, and the next 2 lines are disabling AppArmor. So we don't want the complexity of firewalls and AppArmor getting in the way for this. And the following 2 lines are to do with virtual memory and paging. So if a machine runs out of memory, it goes to disk. We don't want a virtual machine going to disk and getting in a mess. So these 2 lines just disable virtual memory. So if we run out the 4 gig we've allocated, the machine's going to crash, and we know why it's crashed. The next line we can ignore. It's just a line I always put because I use this host name for various other things, and I've just used the same file. So the next 4 or 5 lines, they install Docker, a network utility Docker needs, and Docker Compose. So then the second last line is git clone, and that's going and downloading Docker's reference architecture stuff. So if you download this, you'll see there's about 20 really good environments, and all we're doing is the Docker Compose. We're running one of the files that we've downloaded, which is the WordPress MySQL Docker Compose YAML. So we're not actually doing anything, we're just installing Docker Compose, fetching a reference architecture for the WordPress MySQL, and then installing it. And that's it, nice and simple. No need to make things overcomplicated. There's enough components going around here for you all to learn enough. We'll repeat this with Peppermint in the next class, and you can see it's just very much the same thing, but instead of getting a reference architecture, we'll make up our own Docker Compose file. So what we're building, we've got an Apple Silicon Mac, it's an M1 MacBook. We've got iTerm, VMware and Vagrant. So they're the software installed on the machine. And then within the virtual machine, we're installing Ubuntu, Docker, Docker Compose. We're downloading the Docker Compose compose.yaml file from Docker. We're going to create a folder for the database data that's going to reside in the machine. So varlib docker volumes, there's going to be the file there. So it's best practice for a Docker image not to write itself, but to export the data elsewhere, so that the machines can be, the Docker images are read they're read only. So should you want to make this run long term, we'll look at strategies about backing up the data and all that. But the container images installed are MariaDB, which is just a relational database, and WordPress itself. This is the WordPress file we've got. So the Docker Compose file. So we've got two services. So services is what describes the Docker images. So one's a database and one's WordPress itself. So the image command, it tells Docker what image to get, and that's a pre-packaged Maria database image, and it's got a specific version. It runs the command when it starts. It tells us we've got a DB data is where we're going to store our data, restart it, and when it spins up, the environment commands tell WordPress what the database name is, the user and password, and we're going to run it in port 3306, which is the default port. And then for WordPress, it's going to go and get the WordPress latest image. It's going to run it in port 80, which is the HTTP port. And this is how it can chat to the database service, because it knows the same passwords. So you're going to connect to the WordPress Docker image, and the WordPress Docker image, it's going to connect to the database image behind the scenes, and that's how everything's going to work. Okay. So I've ran the Vagrant file. So ls, we've got a Vagrant file, just one file. So I ran Vagrant up, and it took 2.5 minutes to run. In my mind, it was 10 minutes, but that's it. So the command to run was Vagrant up. So we run that, and then we go to the IP address that we've specified in the Vagrant file. If you're on an old PC or that, whatever PC IP address you've got, so just port 80. This is the WordPress setup. So English, continue, test, username test, and I will copy the default password. See, test.world. Install WordPress. There we go. Don't save the password. So we're going to log into WordPress. We go test. Don't save the password. And there you go. You've got your own WordPress environment. That wasn't too tricky to set up. Anyone who wants to play with WordPress and learn to do stuff, or maybe set up a blog, just help yourself. There's plenty of YouTube videos on how to actually use WordPress itself, but this was a demo on how simple it was to build a repeatable pattern. So thank you very much.